I never imagined that a simple invitation could change the course of my life. It was a cold February night, and the clock had just struck midnight when I received a mysterious message on my phone. The message was brief, but impossible to ignore. Tonight, at 12 a.m., join us for a Valentine's game like no other. Win the heart of the one you desire. I was both puzzled and intrigued. As a husband with a routine life, such an invitation seemed out of place. Yet, a part of me, curious and reckless, decided to answer its call. I set out under a sky heavy with dark clouds, feeling the chill of the night seep into my bones. The address led me to a secluded area just off the main road, near an old graveyard, that everyone in town whispered about. The iron gate creaked as I pushed it open, and the path ahead was lit only by a few dim street lamps. The combination of the graveyard's eerie silence and the promise of a twisted game gave me an unsettling feeling, but I pressed on. I couldn't help but wonder, was this a prank, or something far more sinister? As I reached the destination, I saw an old, abandoned mansion looming against the night. Its broken windows and creaking wooden door added to the sense of foreboding. A sign at the entrance read, "Welcome, players. Let the games begin." Despite every instinct screaming for me to turn back, I stepped inside. The interior was shrouded in shadows, with only scattered candles providing a weak light that danced across the peeling wallpaper. My footsteps echoed in the silence as I made my way into a large hall where several other young men had already gathered. I didn't recognize any of them. Their faces were a mix of nervous excitement and anxious anticipation. In the center of the hall stood a raised platform where a shadowy figure in a dark suit addressed the crowd in a calm, yet unnerving tone. "Welcome, gentlemen," he said. "Tonight you will partake in a series of games, a contest of charm, wit, and endurance. The prize? The heart of the one you desire. A chance to win a companion who will be yours for as long as fate allows." His voice was smooth, almost hypnotic, and it held an odd mixture of warmth and warning. I listened intently, my heart pounding, with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. My eyes were soon drawn to the other side of the hall, where a group of women waited in an elegantly decorated room. They were breathtakingly beautiful, each one possessing an allure that was both inviting and inexplicably cold. Their eyes, dark and deep, seemed to hold secrets too vast to be understood. Their smiles were polite but eerie, as if they were performing for an audience rather than welcoming guests. I felt an immediate pull towards them, a desire to win their favor, even though there was something unsettling about their presence. I couldn't help but think that they were not entirely human, though I quickly dismissed the thought as a trick of my imagination. Or so I hoped. The games were announced one by one, each with a seemingly innocent title that belied its true nature. The first challenge was called Guess the Height. We were to stand before one of the women and simply guess her height. It sounded simple, almost trivial, but as I approached a woman whose eyes seemed to see right through me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being measured in more ways than one. Her delicate features and an almost imperceptible smile made me feel as though she were silently judging my very soul. After that, we were instructed to move on to the next game. Cuddling. The rules were simple. Get as close as possible and hold a pose without breaking the physical contact. It was meant to be a test of intimacy, but the atmosphere turned the act into something deeply unnerving. When I wrapped my arms around the nearest girl, I felt a coldness that was unnatural, a chill that went beyond the cool night air. I could see the other men hesitating, glancing around as if seeking an escape, but none of us could quite articulate the growing dread that had begun to settle in our hearts. As the games continued, the challenges became even more peculiar. One game, dubbed Keep Your Eyes Open, required us to stare into the eyes of our chosen partner for as long as possible. I sat there, my gaze locked with a woman whose eyes were as black as midnight. The silence between us was thick, every second, stretching into an eternity. In that moment, I wondered if I was staring into the abyss of something supernatural. Her gaze was intense, as if she were trying to pull something from within me, a secret that I wasn't ready to share, even with myself. Between rounds, I found myself wandering the dark corridors of the mansion, trying to make sense of it all. I recalled the gentle prayers I used to say before bed, a habit I had maintained throughout my life. That night, however, those prayers seemed to have little power against the strange forces at work. I prayed quietly, asking for guidance, but the silence that answered was deafening. Every shadow and creak of the old building felt like a warning. I began to suspect that these games were not merely contests of affection. They were trials, designed to test our very humanity. I tried to focus on the promise of winning a partner, a promise that was too alluring to resist. But even as I played along, a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered that something was terribly wrong. The beauty of the women, the unnatural perfection of their appearances, and the icy touch of their presence hinted at a darker truth. I caught fleeting glances of something in their eyes, something that resembled malice or perhaps an ancient sorrow. Yet I pushed these thoughts aside, clinging to the hope that I would emerge victorious. Standing among the other boys, I felt isolated despite the crowd. None of us had come to this strange game out of friendship or common purpose. We were all strangers drawn together by a promise that was as mysterious as it was tempting. The host's words rang in my ears. Play the games, win the heart, or face the consequences. At the time, I hadn't fully understood what those consequences might be. Now, as I sat in that dimly lit hall, every instinct in my body warned me that I was in far deeper than I had ever imagined. That first part of the night left me with more questions than answers. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. The games were a mere prelude to a revelation I was not yet ready to face. With every round, every challenge, the sense of foreboding grew stronger. I realized that what had started as a bizarre contest to win a girl's affection was slowly morphing into a battle for survival, a battle against forces that were both unseen and unimaginable. And so, as the candlelight flickered and the night grew even darker, I found myself trapped in a game where the stakes were not measured in points or smiles, but in the very essence of life and death. I prayed silently, wondering if my faith would be enough to carry me through what was to come. Little did I know, this was only the first step on a path that would force me to confront horrors beyond my wildest fears. The next round of games began almost as soon as we finished the first. A strange tension filled the air. I could see the fear and excitement in the eyes of the other boys, though none of us spoke. Our earlier challenges had felt like mere tests of charm and endurance. Now, as the host's voice echoed through the hall, I sensed that things were about to take an even darker turn. The host explained the next game with a disturbing calm. Now, we shall play Rate the Smile. Each of you will be shown a smile. Not just any smile, but one that holds a secret. You must decide if the smile is genuine, or if it conceals something else. His words sent shivers down my spine. I looked towards the room where the women were gathered. Their smiles, so beautiful and yet unnervingly still, hid the true nature of what was to come. One by one, a large screen lit up with the image of a smiling face. The smile was both inviting and unnerving, like a mask hiding a tragic secret. I tried to focus, remembering the words of the host, but as I stared at the smile, I felt something cold inside me, as if an unseen force had touched my soul. It was as if the smile was a trap, drawing me closer into a web I could not escape. I hesitated, my heart pounding, before I was forced to give my answer by a subtle nod to the host. When my turn came, I felt a chill as I gazed at the face on the screen. I whispered my verdict. Not genuine. The moment the words left my lips, a ripple of quiet approval seemed to pass through the crowd. But then something unexpected happened. The image on the screen flickered, and for a split second, I saw a reflection of myself in the eyes of the woman whose smile we had just rated. It was as if she was looking back at me, judging me. I couldn't tell if it was my imagination or something far more sinister. After Rate the Smile, the host announced another game. Next, we have the Unseen Gaze. In this round, you will pair up with a partner of your choice and simply stare into their eyes. The challenge is to maintain eye contact without breaking the connection. At first, this game seemed like a natural progression from the previous one. Yet, as I approached one of the girls, I noticed her eyes shimmer with a strange, unnatural light. It was as if they were windows into a deep, dark world, one that I was not meant to see. I sat down beside her, and for a few agonizing minutes, we locked eyes. The silence between us was overwhelming, broken only by the sound of my heartbeat, pounding in my ears. I could feel an inexplicable pull from her gaze, a silent command that made me question whether I wanted to keep looking. In that moment, I realized that this was not a game of affection, but a battle of wills. Her eyes seemed to promise something forbidden, a revelation of secrets I was not ready to learn. The other boys around me also seemed caught in their own private battles. Some managed to maintain their composure, while others began to tremble under the intensity of the challenge. I could see a few men glancing at the exit, their eyes pleading for a way out. But the room itself seemed to have closed in on us, as if it were part of the game. Every candle flickered with an eerie light, and every shadow moved with a life of its own. As the game ended, a low murmur of approval passed over the assembled crowd, and the host smiled, a smile that did not reach his eyes. "You have all shown great resolve," he said, his voice soft yet menacing. "But now, we move on to a more personal challenge." He gestured to a side room, dark and silent except for the faint hum of an old ventilation system. This game is called Hidden Desires. In this round, you must confess one secret that you hold deep within your heart. Your secret will determine the next challenge, and it may very well reveal more about the one you truly seek. I felt my stomach twist into knots. The idea of confessing a secret in such a setting, surrounded by unknown men and ghostly beauties, filled me with dread. Yet something compelled me to continue. I knew that the only way to survive these games was to play by their rules, even if the rules were as twisted as the night itself. One by one, the boys stepped forward to whisper their secrets to the host. The confessions varied from trivial matters to deep, personal regrets. When it was my turn, I hesitated. The room seemed to fall silent as I tried to choose a secret worth confessing. I finally spoke softly. "I fear that I have lost my way. I worry that I might not be the man my wife once believed I was." The words came out before I could stop them. Almost immediately I felt a cold wind brush past me, as if the room itself had acknowledged my confession. A murmur passed through the crowd, and the host nodded slowly. "Very well," he said. "Your confession has not gone unnoticed." The host's eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I felt as if he could see straight into my soul. I wondered if my secret had been enough to seal my fate. The next challenge was even more peculiar. We now play Whisper of the Past. The host explained that we would be given a short, haunting story from our own past, a memory that had been buried deep. We were to whisper this memory into a vintage-looking microphone, and the room would echo it back in a chorus of voices. The twist was that the echoes would reveal hidden truths about us, truths that we might not want to face. When my turn came, I hesitated before whispering a memory from long ago, a time when I had felt truly happy yet now filled with regret. As my voice faltered, the microphone picked up my words and sent them swirling around the room. The echoes grew louder, transforming into voices that recited my deepest fears and secrets. I could barely stand it, feeling as if I was being torn apart by the very sound of my own memories. I closed my eyes, praying silently for strength. It was then that I began to notice something truly unsettling. As the voices recited my darkest memories, I saw subtle changes in the faces of the girls across the room. Their expressions shifted ever so slightly, and for a moment I thought I saw their eyes fill with tears. But when I looked closer, I realized that those were not tears at all. They were drops of something dark, almost like blood. The beauty of their features seemed to mask a hidden agony, a pain that went far beyond any mortal suffering. The final challenge of this round was announced, without ceremony. The last game is the final embrace. The host explained that this game would require all players to find a partner among the women. Once paired, the partners would engage in a final act of closeness, a gesture that symbolized the merging of souls. It was meant to be the climax of the night's contests, a moment where the winner would be revealed. I felt a mix of dread and determination as I moved towards the group of women. I was drawn to one in particular, a woman with eyes that seemed both inviting and sorrowful. As I took her hand and led her away from the main hall, I noticed that the other boys were quickly disappearing into the shadows, some whispering prayers under their breath. The mansion itself groaned as if it were alive, reacting to the intensity of our actions. In that final act, as I embraced her, I felt an overwhelming coldness that sent a shock through my body. It was as if I were holding not a living being, but a specter from a time long past. Her skin was unnaturally cool, and her eyes held a deep sadness that I could not decipher. For a few heartbeats, time seemed to stand still. I felt that I was caught between two worlds, the one of the living and the one of the dead. That embrace, that moment of intimacy, marked a turning point. I suddenly realized that every game we had played was not just a test of physical or emotional strength, but a trial designed to expose our vulnerabilities. The host's games had peeled away our facades, revealing the raw, unfiltered parts of our souls. I could sense that something was amiss. These games were not meant for amusement. They were rituals, ancient and arcane, and the beautiful women were not women at all. They were ghosts, evil spirits who played these games for their own dark pleasure. As the night deepened, the mansion seemed to transform around me. The once grand hall grew darker and more oppressive. The laughter and murmurs of the other boys were replaced by whispers of fear. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to maintain my composure. My prayers, which I had clung to as a shield against the unknown, now seemed to echo hollowly in the vast, empty corridors. I looked around desperately, trying to find a sign of hope or a way out. The host's smile was gone, replaced by a grim expression that betrayed the gravity of the situation. "The final challenge approaches," he intoned, his voice now carrying a hint of finality. "Only one of you will emerge from this night, unchanged. The rest will be claimed by the darkness." With those words, the atmosphere turned suffocating. I knew then that the games were not just a contest of winning a partner, they were a matter of survival. I clutched the hand of my ghostly partner, feeling the chill of her presence seep into my very being. The mansion's corridors beckoned, and I could sense that the true horror was yet to come. In that moment, as I stood between the realms of life and death, I prayed silently for strength. I knew that my faith might be the only thing capable of protecting me from the malevolent forces at play. As the night pressed on and the games continued, I vowed to do whatever it took to endure, no matter how dark the path ahead might be. After the chilling embrace and the haunting echo of our whispered secrets, the night took an even darker turn. I could feel the oppressive weight of unseen eyes watching our every move. The mansion's corridors twisted into labyrinths of shadow and fear, and each step I took deepened my sense of foreboding. It was as if the building itself was alive, feeding on our anxiety and drawing us further into its trap. I clutched the cool hand of my ghostly partner as we left the main hall, but her presence brought little comfort. Her eyes, full of sorrow, and something almost predatory, never left mine. Around me, I noticed that several of the other boys had already vanished into the darkness. Their disappearance was silent and sudden, a whisper of movement, a fading echo of footsteps. I could only wonder, had they already been claimed by the mansion's evil inhabitants, or were they lost in the maze of shadowed corridors? The hosts. Earlier words echoed in my mind. Only one of you will emerge from this night unchanged. The rest will be claimed by the darkness. Those words grew heavier with every passing moment. As I moved deeper into the mansion, the warm glow of the candles seemed to dim, replaced by a sickly pallor that made the walls and floors appear as if they were oozing with despair. Every creak and groan of the old building was amplified, as though the mansion was mourning the fate of its unwilling guests. I tried to steady my breathing and whispered a quiet prayer, hoping that my faith might offer some protection against what lay ahead. My footsteps slowed as I reached a narrow hallway lined with faded portraits whose eyes seemed to follow my every move. In the dim light, the faces in the paintings looked tormented, lost souls trapped in a perpetual state of sorrow. I could not help but feel that they were warning me, pleading for me to turn back, but I knew there was no escape now. The games had become a trial, and I was caught in their merciless grip. I soon heard a soft sound behind me, a faint, almost imperceptible shuffle that made me stop in my tracks. I turned slowly, heart pounding in my ears, and saw a figure moving in the far end of the hall. For a brief moment I thought it was one of the other boys, but the figure moved with an unnatural grace, almost gliding rather than walking. As it drew closer, I recognized it as one of the ghostly women. Her beauty, once so captivating, was now marred by a chilling emptiness in her eyes. She stopped a few feet away and tilted her head as if studying me. Her silence was louder than any words. I could feel her gaze searing into my soul, and with it came an overwhelming sense of despair. The air between us grew frigid, and my prayer died on my lips as I struggled to maintain my composure. I knew then that the games were more than mere contests. They were dark rituals designed to erode our very humanity. The women were not simply participants in a twisted game. They were the arbiters of our fate, bound to the mansion and its ancient curse. My ghostly partner gently squeezed my hand, snapping me back to the present. "We must keep moving," I murmured, though my voice trembled. She gave a barely perceptible nod, and together we retraced our steps along a different corridor. The walls here were covered in peeling wallpaper and symbols I could not decipher. Every step felt like a descent further into madness. As we walked, the murmurs of distant voices reached my ears, whispers that seemed to come from the very walls. They spoke of lost love, broken promises, and a longing that had turned to bitterness over time. The voices mingled with the creaks of the old wood and the sighs of the wind seeping through cracked windows, creating a symphony of sorrow that made my heart ache. I could sense that these were the souls of those who had been claimed before us, their voices trapped in an eternal lament. In one of the larger rooms at the end of the corridor, I discovered a circle of other players gathered around a makeshift altar. Their faces were pale, and their eyes reflected a terror that mirrored my own. I recognized one of them, a young man with trembling hands, whose eyes darted around as if expecting the darkness to pounce at any moment. He looked up as I entered, his voice barely audible as he whispered, "They're coming for us. One by one, we are being taken." Before I could ask him to explain, a sudden gust of cold wind blew through the room, extinguishing several candles. In that brief moment of darkness, I heard a sharp, inhuman laugh, a sound that made my blood run cold. When the lights flickered back on, I noticed that the young man had disappeared, leaving behind only a scattering of his belongings and an echo of his terror. My heart pounded, and I felt the grip of dread tightening around me. I knew I had to find a way out, a path that might lead to safety. With every instinct screaming to flee, I began searching the room for clues. A hidden door, a loose panel in the wall, anything that might offer an escape route. The other boys huddled together in silence, their faces marked by a mix of hopelessness and resignation. It seemed that hope was slowly draining away from us all. My ghostly partner watched me with those deep, sorrowful eyes, as if urging me onward. "I must try," I said aloud, more to myself than to her, and began to inspect the walls. As I ran my hand along a section of the damp plaster, my fingers brushed against a rough, uneven surface. I pressed lightly, and to my surprise, a small door creaked open, revealing a narrow passage beyond. I hesitated only for a moment. Fear warred with the desperate need to escape, and then motioned for her to follow me. The passage was dark and narrow, with only the faintest glimmer of light at its far end. Every step we took was accompanied by the sound of our echoing footsteps and the distant, almost imperceptible chanting of voices. The air grew colder still, and I felt as if we were descending into the very bowels of the earth. I clutched my partner's hand tightly, silently praying that my faith would shield us from the unseen evil that lurked just beyond the reach of the weak light. As we ventured deeper into the passage, the walls closed in around us, adorned with ancient symbols that pulsed with a dim, otherworldly light. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribcage, and my breath came in shallow, rapid bursts. The oppressive darkness was almost tangible, pressing in from all sides and making every moment a battle against the suffocating dread that threatened to overwhelm me. At the end of the passage, we reached a heavy wooden door. With trembling hands, I pushed it open and found myself in a vast, circular chamber. The room was dominated by a large, ornate mirror that reached from floor to ceiling. In its reflection, I saw not only my own frightened face, but also the faces of the ghostly women, surrounding me in spectral form. Their eyes were filled with a mix of sorrow, longing, and something far more sinister, a hunger that could not be sated. The host appeared in the mirror, his reflection superimposed over the faces of the ghosts, and spoke in a voice that resonated with dark authority. "Welcome to the heart of our game," he intoned. "Here, you must confront the truth of your soul. Only through facing the shadows within can you hope to escape the fate that awaits you." His words sent a shiver down my spine, and I realized that this chamber was the final stage of their twisted ritual. In that moment, I understood that every game, every challenge had been a step toward this final reckoning. The mirror did not simply reflect our physical forms. It revealed the hidden darkness inside us all. I watched in horror as my own reflection began to change, morphing into a visage that was gaunt and haunted, filled with regrets and unspoken sins. The ghostly women around me seemed to be feeding on that inner turmoil, their expressions growing ever more intense as if they were drawing strength from my despair. I closed my eyes tightly and whispered a desperate prayer, clinging to the hope that my faith might grant me deliverance. The mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water, and for a moment I saw fleeting images of my past, moments of love, loss, and mistakes that I had long tried to forget. The memories swirled together, forming a vortex of pain and regret, and I felt as if I were being pulled into a whirlpool of my own making. When I finally dared to open my eyes again, the chamber was silent. The ghostly figures had receded into the shadows, and the mirror showed only my reflection once more. But something had changed. The overwhelming sense of despair had been replaced by a steely determination. I realized that while the mansion and its inhabitants might be powerful, they fed on our weakness. To survive, I would have to summon every ounce of courage and faith I possessed. I stepped away from the mirror and turned to my ghostly partner. "We must keep moving," I said firmly, my voice steadier than I felt. She looked at me, her eyes reflecting a mixture of sorrow and admiration, and silently nodded. As we left the circular chamber through another narrow door that opened into a dim corridor, I felt that the final test was drawing near, a test that would separate those who could overcome their inner darkness from those who would be consumed by it. Every step forward was a battle against the chilling memories and the haunting voices that still whispered from the walls. Yet, despite the terror that gripped me, I held fast to my prayerful resolve. The path ahead was uncertain, and I knew that the true horror was not merely the ghostly apparitions or the sinister games, but the darkness that resided within each of us. And as I walked into that unknown, I prayed that my faith would be enough to guide me to the light beyond this crucible of shadows. The corridors of the mansion twisted and turned like a living maze, and every step I took felt heavier than the last. My heart pounded in my ears as I realized that time was running out. The words of the host still echoed in my mind. "Only one of you will emerge from this night unchanged." I could almost feel the weight of that promise bearing down on me, urging me to act before the darkness claimed the rest of us. I walked quickly, my footsteps echoing on the cold, stone floors. The narrow passageways grew tighter, the air heavier, and the silence more oppressive with every turn. I no longer saw any familiar faces among the other boys. They were either lost in the twisting corridors or had already been taken by the shadows. I clutched the hand of my ghostly partner for a brief moment, seeking reassurance in her sorrowful eyes, but even her silent presence could not dispel the dread that now gripped me. In the dim glow of a flickering lantern, I noticed a door at the end of a particularly narrow hallway, a door that looked out of place amid the ancient stone walls. It was heavier and sturdier than the others, its surface etched with symbols I did not recognize. My heart urged me forward, whispering that this might be an escape, a way out of the nightmare that had become my reality. With trembling hands, I pushed it open, and a rush of cold, damp air met me. Beyond that door lay a long, narrow corridor that sloped downward as if it led into the very bowels of the earth. I hesitated for only a moment before stepping into the passage, praying silently for strength and guidance. My mind raced as I remembered the many prayers I had whispered over the years, the countless nights I had sought solace in the divine. In that dark corridor, I clung to my faith like a lifeline. I repeated my prayers under my breath, each word a small shield against the cold, creeping terror that surrounded me. Perhaps it was this habit, this unyielding belief, that gave me a strange sense of resilience, a spark of hope in the midst of overwhelming despair. The corridor led me to a cavernous chamber, its ceiling lost in shadows and its walls lined with ancient, crumbling texts. The oppressive air pressed down on me as I slowly made my way across the room. In the center of the chamber, a large, ornate mirror stood like a sentinel, its surface dark and undulating. I recalled the mirror from earlier, the one that had revealed the hidden darkness within our souls. Now, its power seemed to wane, as if the chamber itself was offering me a final chance to escape its curse. I stopped in front of the mirror, taking a moment to gather my thoughts. In its reflection, I saw not only my own terrified face but also the faint, flickering images of those who had already been claimed by the mansion. Their eyes were vacant, their expressions frozen in a mixture of sorrow and resignation. I could feel their silent pleas, their desperate need to be freed from the eternal torment of that place, but I knew I could not help them. My only hope was to save myself and leave this nightmare behind. The sound of a distant, echoing laugh sent a shiver down my spine. I turned sharply, half expecting to see one of the ghostly women gliding towards me, her beauty twisted into a mask of malice. For a moment, I was paralyzed by fear, but the prayers on my lips grew louder, stronger. I reminded myself that I was more than the sum of my fears, that I had a will to live, a determination fueled by love for my wife and the life I had once known. It was then that I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible shuffle behind me. I spun around, but the corridor was empty. My heart raced as I pressed forward, the sound of my footsteps mingling with the distant murmur of voices that seemed to echo from every corner of the mansion. The voices whispered of lost souls and forgotten, memories of lives interrupted and dreams shattered. I knew that if I hesitated too long, those voices would become a chorus that would drag me down into the abyss with them. As I rounded a corner, I caught sight of movement, a shadow slipping across the far end of the corridor. The spectral figure was one of the ghostly women, her pale face bathed in an eerie, silvery light. Her eyes met mine for a fleeting moment, and in that glance I saw profound sorrow mingled with an unyielding hunger. Without warning, she extended a hand as if beckoning me to follow. I froze, the command in her silent gesture sending a surge of panic through my veins. Was she inviting me to join her? To become one of the lost souls forever trapped in this wretched place? That moment of hesitation was all I needed. A sudden realization struck me. I had to run. The games were not merely contests of charm or wit. They were deadly trials meant to snare the unwary and claim their souls. With no time to ponder further, I turned on my heel and sprinted down the corridor, my footsteps echoing wildly in the oppressive silence. I could feel the cold presence of my pursuers behind me. Their voices grew louder, a discordant blend of mocking laughter and mournful wails that chased me relentlessly. My breath came in ragged gasps as I dashed through the labyrinthine hallways, guided only by the desperate hope of finding an exit. Every turn, every narrow passageway became a blur of stone and shadow as I raced against the encroaching darkness. I could almost feel their presence, the ghostly women and the unseen forces that lurked in every corner, closing in on me. But my prayers did not cease. With every step, I recited them silently, a steady rhythm that bolstered my resolve. Perhaps it was this unwavering faith that allowed me to outrun the spectral terrors. Or perhaps I was simply lucky, a fortunate soul chosen by fate to escape the mansion's curse. The pursuit was relentless. I turned down one dark passage after another, my mind frantically searching for any sign of an exit. At one point I stumbled upon a heavy wooden door set into the wall, its surface scorched by what looked like long-ago flames. Without a second thought, I threw myself against it, and to my astonishment it swung open with a groan. Beyond the door was a narrow staircase leading upward, its steps illuminated by a faint glow that seemed almost otherworldly. I scrambled up the stairs, each step a desperate bid for freedom. The sound of pursuit grew fainter with every upward stride, replaced by the rhythmic beating of my heart and the soft cadence of my prayers. At last, I burst through the final door and found myself outside, under a moonlit sky. The cold night air hit me like a shock, a welcome relief from the suffocating darkness of the mansion. I stood there, gasping for breath as I glanced back at the imposing structure behind me. The mansion loomed like a dark sentinel against the night sky, its broken windows and crumbling facade a testament to the horrors that lay within. I could see faint shapes moving in the shadows of its upper floors, ghostly figures still caught in their eternal game. But they no longer reached me. I had made it out. Even now, as I recount that terrifying night, I cannot be certain what granted me the strength to escape. Was it my unyielding faith and the countless prayers that had been a part of my life as a husband? Or was it simply a twist of fate, a stroke of luck in the midst of unimaginable horror? I sometimes wonder if I was chosen, spared from the fate that befell the others. All I know is that I ran, driven by a primal instinct to survive and a desperate hope to return to the life I once knew. I never looked back after that night. Every time I close my eyes, I see the twisted corridors, the haunting eyes of the ghostly women, and the grinning specter of the host who had orchestrated this macabre contest. The memory of that cursed mansion still haunts me, a dark chapter in my life that I can never forget. I keep my prayers close, a reminder of the faith that carried me through that terrible ordeal. Perhaps it was that faith which allowed me to run faster than the darkness, or maybe I was just incredibly lucky that night. Now, as I live my life with a wary heart and a deep appreciation for every sunrise, I sometimes hear whispers in the silence, a reminder that the mansion and its dark games are still out there, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander too close. I share my story not to scare, but to warn. Some invitations should never be accepted, and some games are far more dangerous than they seem. And so, my dear listener, if you ever receive an invitation on a cold, moonlit night, an invitation to a game that promises the heart of a beloved one, remember my words. Beware the beauty that hides malice, the laughter that conceals sorrow, and the games that are more than they appear. For in the end, I was the only one who was able to run away, whether by the grace of my prayers or the mercy of luck. But not all who enter that dark realm find their way out. This is my truth, a warning carved in the echoes of that unholy night, a truth I carry with every beat of my heart.